I'm going to bring up Brian Bolwell as our next TED Talk. There's only a few people in these organizations who can walk around without a name tag, and one of them is Brian Bolwell. He is the chair of the Cleveland Clinic Taussig Cancer Institute, where he oversees arguably the largest single oncology practice in the state, which links nationally and internationally. He may, in fact, oversee the largest single oncology practice in the world. Brian understands and breathes leadership, having served as president of the medical staff and vice chair of professional services and affairs at the Cleveland Clinic, member of the board of governors, and now this year executive director for the physician leadership and development at the Cleveland Clinic, which was noted on Tuesday with the announcement of the relocation to the new Health Education Center of the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Global Leadership and Learning Institute. He's going to give us a primer on leadership.
Thank you very much, Dan, for those very kind words. I go on a lot of first dates, and about a year ago, I was trying to impress my date, and I mentioned that I have a monthly column about leadership. And she looked at me and said, "What makes you so special that you can write a monthly column about leadership?" That date didn't go particularly well. But it was a fair question. So why am I interested in the topic, and why would I even think I know anything about it? Well, about 15, 16 years ago, I had the opportunity to get what's called a 360. So at the time, I was in a role in the organization that about 15 organizational leaders at the clinic had 2 executive coaches who were people who were designed to help leaders. And they went around and talked to about 20 people who worked for me. And the idea was to try to generate insight about what I do well and what I do badly. And so they came up with a 25-page summary of everything I do badly. The amount of paper devoted to what I do well was actually about a sentence. So it was illuminating. And given that most of us in this field like to do well and like to get A's, I certainly saw that I had an opportunity to improve on many, many levels. And I decided that I was going to study the topic. I didn't even know there was a literature about leadership, but it turns out there is. There's books and books and books read about leadership. Most of these books are about corporate America. There's actually a paucity of literature about leadership in medicine. And so that's kind of a void. And the more I started to read and learn about leadership, and hopefully try to get better myself, the more I saw a potential opportunity in medicine, especially academic medicine, because in all honesty, I saw a fair number of leaders who weren't doing it very well. And so that's kind of how I got interested in the topic. So question number one is, why does it matter? And I would argue that many of you guys in the room are wondering, why are you even bothering to listen to me right now? Well, I think everybody is a leader. If you're a member of a family, you're probably in one way or another a leader of some aspect of your family. If you teach, you're a leader because you're leading your students. If people help you in any way, you're a leader. So I think all of us, to some degree, are leaders. But it turns out that most of us don't realize that there's different ways to be a leader, that some approaches are quite good and some approaches are not good at all, and in fact can be destructive. So when you open up one of these books about corporate America, they have a variety of statistics. And probably one of the ones that resonates the most with me is that the number one reason why a person leaves their job is because of dissatisfaction with their immediate supervisor. Therefore, if you're a supervisor or you're in some way a leader and you've ever had anybody leave you, it's probably because of you. That's a fact. Only 45% of employees across corporate America believe that their leaders tell the truth. So there's clearly a trust gap as well. The flip side of the coin is leadership excellence can do all sorts of wonderful things. It can generate engagement, it can elevate culture. I would argue it can actually increase your ability to generate change, to innovate, and to achieve success. So that's why leadership matters. What is good leadership? Well, as I said, there's scores and scores of books written about the topic, but a few that I really like basically fall into two categories. One is leadership levels, and there's a guy named John Maxwell who writes a lot about this. The easiest book to digest is called 5 Levels of Leadership. Level 1 leadership is what most leaders do. And what they do is they tell people to do something because they're the boss. And it usually works. People, in fact, do things. If your boss tells you to do something, you'll probably do it. The problem is that it doesn't do much more than that. And at worst, it destroys relationships. It makes a sense of inquiry and innovation disappear. And it generates ambivalence, none of which are good things if your team wants to achieve good things. On the other hand, there are better ways to approach it. So level 2 leadership, according to Maxwell, is to form relationships with your team. Simply talk to them. Ask them questions about their family. Listen to them. Listening is always front and center in any book on leadership. But the point is engage the people who you work with. And level 3 leadership is to form teams. Teams that are based in trust, where team members can count on everybody else. To do that, you have to hold people accountable. But that's okay, because the good members of your team will welcome that. There's a famous quote from Colin Powell about accountability, in which he says, if you delay dealing with a problematic individual on your team, all you will do is generate disengagement of the people who are really doing a good job. Because they'll wind up having to do more work than they otherwise would. The other category of kind of literature about leadership that I very much aspire to is called serving leadership or servant leadership. They're interchangeable. And fundamentally, what they espouse is that when you're a leader, it's not about you, it's about the people who work for you. My primary job as leader of the Cancer Center at the Cleveland Clinic is to support the people who work for the Cancer Center. It has nothing to do with my own personal career, accolades for me, or anything else. Which by definition makes this type of leadership totally foreign to academic medicine. Academic medicine promotes people who are I-focused. My work is the most important thing in the world, and it deserves a Nobel Prize. And if you get a Nobel Prize, I promise you, you'll be appointed to a leadership role. But does that qualify you to be a good leader? Arguably not, because again, in the serving leadership model, everything you do is about your team and not about you. The other tenet of serving leadership is that leadership development and character development are one and the same. So if you want to be a good leader, you've got to have integrity, you've got to tell the truth, you've got to be a good person. And you've got to listen, you've got to engage your people. One of my favorite quotes about serving leadership is give people what they need and they'll give you everything you need. And I think that's probably true. Additionally, more specifically about how to do this, recruiting is really important. So if you're talking about elevating your team, it's important that leaders be part of the recruiting process. And I think that too many leaders aren't. They delegate this, which is a mistake. As you're recruiting, it's very important not just to consider how deep somebody's CV is, but also their emotional intelligence, because you have to be able to work with other people and you have to be able to work as a team. You've always got to tell the truth. If you don't, it'll come out and trust will erode. The other thing that you've got to do, which is kind of tricky, is you've got to preach. So whatever you're passionate about, as a leader, you can't just talk about it. You've actually got to show passion for it, and you've got to preach it. This is something that took me a while to get, and it's probably going to be very difficult for me to explain it right now. But consider that if you're trying to achieve a certain task, if you want to engage everybody, you somehow have to get everybody on board, and you've got to do it over and over and over again. You've got to preach. Probably my favorite leadership book, I just actually handed out this book at a leadership retreat that I just held. It's called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And in the middle of it, there's about 150 pages devoted to 13 leadership behaviors. The most important of which is talk straight, don't spin. Talking straight is actually hard for academicians. Academicians don't like to use simple words. Academicians like to use polysyllabic words. They sound better and they look cool and, it's all good. The problem is that you've got to engage people, and the simpler you are and the more direct you are, the better. The second leadership behavior, which is really a big deal, is this. What separates organizations that are doing well from those who are not doing well? And in general, there's one final common pathway that separates the two, and that is how they treat their fellow man, how they treat each other. Organizations who treat other people well tend to do well. Organizations that treat other people poorly tend to struggle. So simply treating everybody you interact with, saying hi, waving, whatever, elevates culture and helps achieve goals. The fifth behavior is deal with sacred cows. This is really hard to do because there's a lot of sacred cows in academic medicine. It's dangerous to do. It takes courage to do. But if you're a leader, you've got to do it. And always listen. Now, if you want to go even deeper on how to do this, I recommend a book by Brené Brown called Daring Greatly. Daring Greatly is part of a passage of a famous speech by Theodore Roosevelt. It's called The Man in the Arena. This is actually a speech that LeBron James references repeatedly when people criticize whatever he does. And I'm going to take the time, give me a minute, I'm going to read it for you. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So Brené Brown takes this passage, and specifically the words daring greatly, and writes a book about it. And basically, the theme of the book is about two different emotions. One is vulnerability and one is shame. In her thesis, vulnerability is the catalyst for living a life defined by courage, compassion, and connection. She strongly believes that if you truly want to connect to people, and as I pointed out earlier, forming relationships is essential to good leadership. You've got to be willing to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable is risky, and it takes courage. Because the risk is shame, and shame is one of the most powerful human emotions that exists. Shame is the fear of ridicule, of disengagement, and it can destroy one's ability to take risks. It can destroy a team's ability to take risks. And it's the killer of innovation. When shame becomes a management style, which is what level 1 leadership frequently is, engagement dies. So her book basically talks about those two things and how important it is to take risks, to ignore noise from critics and only listen to those people who are actually in the arena, to build resilience, to combat shame, and to be true to your core values. I'll close with a movie reference. So there's a movie that came out a couple years ago called Burnt. It stars Bradley Cooper. And Bradley Cooper in this movie is a chef. And he started off being a chef in France, and he was very successful, but basically became a drug addict and everything fell apart. And so he goes back to Europe after being in America for a while, and he goes to London. He wants to build the best restaurant in the UK and one that's worthy of something called a Michelin 3-star rating. Michelin 3-star rating is this rating given by Michelin Group, which is very few restaurants achieve. It's the best of the best. And initially in the movie, he's a total jerk. He hires a lot of talented people, but he treats them very poorly. And they work for him anyway because he's very talented, but he's very much a level 1 leader. The movie actually didn't get great reviews, but I loved it because it was actually, in my mind, a lot about leadership. So anyway, the day comes when the Michelin reviewers come. And basically what the Bradley Cooper character does, he throws everybody on his team out of the way, does everything himself. It's very frazzled, hectic, chaotic. Takes the dish out and things go very badly. And he then kind of crashes. And he obviously feels miserable. But ultimately, that changed him. I'm going to come back to change in a second. So what happened was he realized that to achieve what he wanted to achieve was a very daunting task. And he actually at one point said, "I'm scared." For this person to have the vulnerability to admit to a colleague that he was scared was a big deal. So it turns out that who came for the first Michelin review wasn't really Michelin. So later on at the end of the movie, the real reviewers come. And what does the Bradley Cooper character do? He says, "We do what we do, and we do it together." Which means he trusted his team. Whoever was going to make the sauce for this dish, they made the sauce for this dish because they did it the same way they always do, because if it's really good, it's really good. And of course, because it's a movie, it went well. But the point is, we do what we do should be a goal of all of ours. All of us as leaders should have a team that every day we do whatever we're doing really, really well. Now, ultimately, if you want to get better and you want to be a better leader, you've got to change. And change is really, really hard. Most people don't want to change. There's a quote from Leo Tolstoy that says, "Everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves." Probably true. If you want to change, number one, you've got to feel enough discomfort to motivate you to change. So in the movie, not getting the Michelin 3 stars and crashing was Bradley Cooper's motivation to change. Importantly, if you want to change, you've got to change what you do. Just having insight about what you do badly isn't good enough. Just wanting to change isn't good enough. You actually have to change what you do. If you don't change what you do, nothing else really matters. So if, in fact, you're not doing X well, you have to change. You have to do something differently. That's something that very few people are willing to do. But the good news is that if you can do that, if you can come up with enough inner strength, courage, and vulnerability to do that, it generates freedom. And freedom, having true free will, is very, very powerful. So we're all leaders. We all can get better. I invite you to read any one of these books about it because it's kind of an interesting topic, and I appreciate your attention.